Hi, everyone. I'm Carly.
And I'm Sophia.
And this is Away She Goes, a podcast from girls who travel.
Each episode will help you feed your wanderlust with travel tips, stories, inspiration, and more. Away she goes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Away She Goes. Today, Sophia and I are joined by Renee Bruns, who's going to talk to us about traveling as a wheelchair user. Renee actually holds the world record for the wheelchair user that traveled to the most countries in a year. So I'm going to let Renee introduce herself, and then we're going to dive in and talk more about what it's like to travel as a wheelchair user in general. Hi, Renee.
Hi, thank you both so much for having me. I am so excited to be here and so excited to share my story with everyone. So my name is Renee, obviously. I do hold the Guinness World Record for most number of countries visited in 1 year using a wheelchair. And that record right now is 55 countries. I was the first person to get that award. So certainly I encourage someone to challenge me and go after that award. It'd be awesome if someone else could beat it. As much as I don't want to lose the record, I do want someone else to have that experience. So I have a permanent disability that is caused by a rare skeletal disorder. I've had it my whole life, and I started using a wheelchair when I was a toddler. So using a wheelchair is something very normal to me. But what's really kind of ironic about using a wheelchair is how it launched me into this journey of travel. So I was born in a very, very small town in rural Ohio. And when I was born, this was the 80s. My mom didn't have any ultrasounds. They weren't very common. And I came out of the womb and she thought I was perfect. Of course, any mother would think that. And the doctors could see that something was not right with my legs. So they told her, we see that there's something not right. You're going to need to go see some specialists. She was in a little bit of denial, but over time, she eventually started to bring me to doctors within Ohio and eventually kind of all across the country. We would go to big cities like Baltimore and Boston and New York City. And through all of that travel is really what launched me into this wanting to see more and more of the world. I was 5 years old when I took my first airplane ride that I remember with my mom going to New York City, and coming from a very small town in Ohio and going to New York City. I was like, oh my God, the world is so big. I have to see more. This is like a different planet for me. I was a little girl. There was no internet. The world was very sheltered for me. So as I started getting older, I realized we've started going to all these doctors and all these specialists. And I remember telling my mom, we're going to all these places. I want to go see more of the country. I want to see all 50 states. And she kind of shook her head and was like, sure, you should do that someday. And, just kind of chalked it up as a little girl, big dream. But without really even knowing it, my whole family and I started going each summer. We would take a family vacation. We started going to new places. And by the time I graduated high school, I had been to all 50 states, which is a really, really cool thing. And what's really kind of cool about it is I didn't do it alone. I did it with my whole family. So I had this really big, ambitious goal of seeing all of the country, and my whole family got to kind of reap the benefits of that. So then I got to be into college age, went through college, and, I started thinking, well, I want to see more of the world. So I've seen all of the United States. What's next? So I started traveling to places like Europe and Mexico and Canada. And it kind of just launched from there. And I was in my mid-20s when I said, I want to go see all of the countries in the world. There's 195 countries. I can go do that. I was a little ignorant, not realizing that there are some places in the world like North Korea or Syria, some places in Africa that maybe aren't the safest to go or a little more challenging to get to. But I had this great ambitious goal. And so I was building a career, very ambitious career, and I was having a lot of fun with it. But with that, I had limited vacation time. So I would bump up my holiday time against Thanksgiving, for example, where I had some, I didn't have to use as many vacation time. So I would take about 2 to 3 trips a year, and I would just go out and see the world, and I'd go to new countries and new places. But it was hard. You can't get a lot done in just 2 or 3 weeks of traveling when you're really trying to check off different countries. So kept going through my career, went through the pandemic. And at this point, I was leading a national team of 250 service people in the insurance industry. And I was just super burnt out, the same way that I think probably most listeners can relate to just going through the pandemic, just everything that came with that. And I had been saving and saving and saving my whole life, wanting to take a year-long trip and go see the world. So I left in May of 2022. I totally resigned from my job. I, put in a resignation. I left without another job lined up, and I went out to see the world. At this point, I wasn't necessarily going after the Guinness World Record. I was wanting to recover from burnout and just kind of do some self-discovery and see what that was like. So I took off on a one-way ticket to Bali, Indonesia. And a few months into my trip, I was doing some research on, where do I want to go next? Where do I want to go next? And I was having a hard time finding resources for a disabled solo traveler. So there's this huge community of travelers, and especially solo travelers. And there's this huge community of disability advocacy and all things around disability, but the two merge, and there's just not a lot of people doing what I was doing. So I thought, I'm going to email Guinness and just, kind of inquire and see, is this something I can maybe break a record on? Because I couldn't find anyone else doing it. And we exchanged a few messages, and they ultimately came back and said, why don't you go after this record of visiting the most countries in 1 year, since you're on this journey. And so that's what I did. And I received the award in February of 2023. And here I am now, having been to 118 countries, all 50 states, of course, and all 7 continents. So I have certainly seen much of the world and seen it from a different perspective, with these 4 wheels that I have underneath me.
That's incredible. So something that I think of, I also have a very ambitious goal of visiting every country in the world, recognizing again, the same things you said, that
sure,
certain places may or may not realistically or safely happen in my lifetime, but that's the goal. I think that a lot of able-bodied people know, okay, stairs are a problem for somebody who has a wheelchair. There are things that are common that anybody can look at and recognize is, a potential challenge. But what are some challenges when traveling as a wheelchair user that some people may not realize or may not think about at first?
Yeah, for sure. So I come from the United States, and there's immense regulation in the United States around buildings, is infrastructure. I'll just call it infrastructure. So one of the common things that I ran into traveling the world was just the lack of regulation around infrastructure. And one of the biggest challenges, or most inconvenient challenges, I will say, was in hotels. So if I look on a booking.com or one of the, expedia.com, and I'm looking for a hotel, for example, and I put in that I need it to be accessible, what that means to me is my standards of what that looks like in the United States. But when I get to a place like Indonesia, for example, their idea of handicap accessible is very different. So I would get in the habit of messaging places asking, are there stairs to get into your lobby? And if there are, is there a ramp? I would ask about the hotel room itself. We get so used to, myself as a wheelchair user, all of the doorways being wide enough for a wheelchair to get through. But when you get to a hotel in a different part of the world, that's not necessarily true. And then often even if you can get into the room, getting into the bathroom is a whole nother challenge. So trying to get into the bathroom where the toilet is, and then what does the shower look like? And you just have these things kind of compound, and you get there and you think it's going to be fine. And then, like I said, you go to take a shower and it's not really a possibility. So there's that piece of the infrastructure. On top of that, of course, there's so much history in this world. And I used this as an example recently. Angkor Wat in Cambodia is a beautiful place. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And of course, it's ancient, and there were no ramps when they built that. It's hardly accessible for an able-bodied person, more or less somebody with a wheelchair. So trying to navigate places like that and the frustration that comes with it's a unique challenge. And I often look at it and say there's this immense amount of history, and what does it look like if we were to put a ramp in? Is that destroying the the history of it and the beauty of it, or is that modernizing it for somebody with a disability to get to and to be able to experience the same historical view and the same experience that an able-bodied person would? And I can't answer that. I think it's a very personal opinion about what do we do in those situations. But to answer your question, those are the things that are very challenging, is how do you get to see parts of the world that are so beautiful, but are just so hard to get to.
Yeah, I never thought about like hotel, like doorways.
Right.
That's just something that.
Yeah. I kind of on that note, it's restaurants. When I think of restaurants and I think of going to a restroom within a restaurant, it's difficult to know whether that restroom is going to be accessible. So it's a constant get to the restaurant, check out the restroom, and if it looks like it's going to work for me, great. I'm going to have an extra coffee for breakfast. Otherwise, it's moderating your intake so that you can leave the restaurant to go back to the hotel or wherever you might need to go to get something accessible.
Well, and that just made me think. I actually just got back yesterday. I went to Maine. I live in upstate New York. I went to Maine for the week. And I just drove back yesterday, and we were in a really cute little Airbnb, a cute little cottage. The bathroom was so small.
Mm-hmm.
And the shower was, if you take like a general standard size shower stall, it was probably realistically like a third or half of the size, and to the point where like my friend and I, we were joking, we're like, we can't even shave our legs because we can't bend over. You have to literally stand like straight up. So that kind of thing, not something that I would think of, but I can imagine like arriving at that Airbnb and then not being able to get into the shower would pose a problem.
For sure. And I know it's probably really gross to even admit this in a public space, but the number of times that I've gotten to a hotel or an Airbnb and I'm saying, you know what, I'm only here for 2 days, I'm just going to skip my shower and move on. It's just one of those things that you just kind of chalk up and say, this is life. I'm in Indonesia, focus on the good things and put a little extra deodorant on today.
Totally understandable.
Absolutely. We've all done that.
For sure.
Yeah, usually it's because like the flooring looks like questionable and you're like, am I going to come back with some fungi on my foot?
Oh, God. No.
For sure.
And for you, it's just slightly different, maybe worse, because it's not even an option.
For sure. Exactly. And there, I have had a number of showers where I'm saying, should I just sit on the floor of the shower or the bathtub? And then to your point, it's what sort of disease am I going to walk away with if I do that? So you just kind of opt for putting on, a fresh shirt and hope it works.
Yeah.
Wow.
Apart from all of that, are there any upsides to traveling with a wheelchair? Like, I think I saw something on TikTok where someone was like, well, I never have to carry my heavy backpack.
For sure. There are a lot of advantages, and I like to focus on those because, as we all know, the world can be heavy. But some of the things that kind of stand out, I don't often have to stand in lines, and that's immigration lines, that's lines at museums, that's lines at restaurants. Often there's this, I call it the special line, or the princess line, where you get to go to the handicap accessible line and you get to kind of cut in front of others. So there's some advantages there. One of the things I have learned in the past year, especially doing much of my travel solo, was I got to see the world from a different perspective. And when I say that, I got to see people around the world from a different perspective because I stand out. I'm alone, a blonde female in parts of the world where this is a very odd thing for many people to see. And their response to me was so heartwarming and so welcoming. And I got to see this side of humanity where kindness really just came out of people in a way that I had never really experienced before. Before this past year, I had done obviously an immense amount of travel, but I always was with somebody, a friend or a family member, my life partner. So they were always the ones to help me. But when I was by myself and I needed somebody to help me with my bag or help me up a curb, people just amazed me around the world. And that's not even specific to a part of the world or a specific culture. It is truly around the world. And the way that people have stepped up was really cool. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer to your what are the upsides. Of course, there's cutting in lines. Sometimes you get discounts at places because you use a wheelchair. But for me, the biggest upside was being able to see the cultures and the people from a different lens.
That is very cool.
It's encouraging to hear that there are still good, like enough good people out there that it makes an impact, you know?
Yeah, and I think when I left, of course, I was coming out of this pandemic and I had led a large team through all of that. There's all of the things going on in the US politically and everything was just very heavy. And frankly, I had lost my hope in humanity. It was just, I felt like everything was so negative and so heavy. And it was a big part of why I left. I knew that's not who I wanted to be. I didn't want to have that negative energy in me. So for all intents and purposes, was going on an extended vacation. And it really did unexpectedly refresh my view of humanity. And I really needed that to see that at the core of all of us, we're so much more alike. And we get so lost in social media and the news and all of these opinions, and when we really take off those layers deep down, there's this incredible commonality between all human beings, and it was really, really cool to see.
That's really great. Are there other things you've already gone into, I think a lot of them here, but are there other things that you wish that people knew more about wheelchair users in general or traveling specifically?
So about wheelchair users, of course, I think it is a hard thing for many people to understand, and I recognize that, and I try to give people the grace for their curiosity, because I do recognize it is a lot of curiosity. My biggest advice to somebody who is not used to dealing with a wheelchair user would be to let them lead the way. They will ask for help. If they don't ask for help and you reach out and say, hey, can I help you with that door? If they tell you no, respect them, because that wheelchair user knows exactly what they need and when they need it, the same way that anyone else does. So this assumption of a wheelchair user not knowing what they need is frustrating. So that would be my biggest piece of advice for somebody. Offer a hand. If the wheelchair user tells you no, just respect that. As far as traveling, I would say to anybody out there, when I got on that plane to Bali by myself, going to a part of the world that I knew was not going to be super accessible, as a female, solo female traveler, the fear that I had inside of me was so immense. And I'm sure so many of the listeners can relate to this. But my life partner dropped me off at the airport, and I remember thinking, I hope my flight's canceled for whatever reason. I can't do this. I am so afraid. But once I got there, I was totally fine. Within a day, I realized that this was going to be the trip of a lifetime. And that trip can be a week, or it can be a year, or anything in between there. But don't let that fear stop you from going to those places in the world that you're afraid of. Of course, the fear is there to protect you. So listen to it to some degree. Don't just jump on a plane to North Korea and think everything's going to be great. But do your research and let yourself have fun, because it really is such a cool thing to get out there and see the world.
That's some really great advice for everyone, really.
Everybody.
I think we've all had these moments, whether traveling or somewhere else, where like, I hope everything gets canceled or I get swallowed by the ground.
Exactly. I don't want to go. I want to stay here in my apartment that I know and I'm familiar with, and it feels safe. But you're really missing out by letting that fear control you.
Yeah. Do you have any more specific advice for wheelchair users or other travelers with mobility aids?
This is a tough one, because everyone's disability is unique to them. What I always say is, don't let it stop you. Start small. If you want to go see New York City, go see New York City. And then from there, if you want to go see Paris, go see Paris. One of the things that I have found to be very important for me is to give myself a break, because dealing with the constant accessibility needs and just the extra stuff, I'll call it stuff, that comes from traveling with a wheelchair is exhausting. Not just physically, but emotionally too. It becomes very tolling. So give yourself the grace and the time to take a day where you say, I have a nice hotel today. If I don't leave the hotel, that is okay because I'm here doing it and I'm giving myself the rests that I need so that I can continue on my journey. Don't feel like you have to go climb a mountain on day one.
I love that. I'm all for taking a mental health day and just a chill day.
Yeah, that applies to everyone. I think it's easy to burn yourself out, and when you're tired, you can't think well. You just can't enjoy it. So give yourself, the time you need to rest.
Something we've talked about here before in previous episodes is like the guilt associated with doing that. Sometimes, like, I'm here, I should be happy, I should be feeling great. I like I said, just at the time of recording this, came back from a trip a couple of days ago, and I woke up one of the days on the trip with a horrible stomach ache and just fell off the entire day. And I, in the morning, and I was with my best friend actually. So I was like, okay, we're out, we're doing stuff. And it got to a point where at lunch, I was just like, you know what? I cannot go out and be a functioning adult right now. So I went back to our Airbnb, and she's very good to travel with. So she was like, that's fine. We're in the United States. So she went off and went to a beach and went swimming. I took a shower, took a nap, drank some water. And a couple hours later, I was not totally better, but I was better enough that I could like go out to dinner. And the next day I woke up and I was fine. So it's, but even then there's still that guilt of I should be doing things. I shouldn't,
I know.
So it's so tough.
It's real.
It is. It's tough sometimes to overcome that feeling of guilt of, well, you're here on a trip and now you're taking a nap. Why are you taking a nap?
Yeah. Well, if anyone needs validation, I'm here to validate your okayness to take that mental health day. I mean, seriously, you can't, if you're not enjoying it, then what is the point?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In your travels, do you feel like you visited any countries that were like extra good with accessibility? I know as somebody who also lives in the US, obviously we have a ton of regulations and that kind of thing. Were there others that you found where even maybe you were surprised by how good the accessibility was?
Yeah, so I haven't been to all of the countries in the world, but I will tell you the ones that I have been to, and I think this probably holds true for all of them, but Australia and New Zealand were very accessible. They're obviously pretty modern. And then really what I would put right behind the US isn't even Australia and New Zealand. I would say the Nordic countries. So Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, all of those countries, they truly blew me away. I was expecting to get there when I visited a few years ago, get there and have a very much of a European feel and a little bit older buildings with cobblestone streets. And they definitely had some of that, but they made it accessible in a way that it was so natural that it was like, holy cow, I have this beauty of Europe with this accessibility of a place similar to the United States. And it was liberating in so many ways.
That's great. Yeah. Sophia and I have both Sophia's been to all of Scandinavia. I've been to Denmark and Sweden, but those are places that both of us have definitely been. And I see what you mean thinking about Denmark, which is where I was longer. You don't notice it, but it's there.
Yeah. They've done a great job of keeping their culture and the history while still incorporating some of those modern things that just make it more livable.
Do you have a favorite place that you've been? I know that's tough.
I know it is tough. And people ask me this all the time. And if I put all my answers back to back, it would probably be like, what is going on? I think it probably just depends on my day and my mood.
Something different.
Yeah. No, what tends to be consistent is Southeast Asia. And that's really ironic given that we just talked about accessibility because it's probably one of the least accessible parts of the world. But the people there, I just cannot get enough of the people and the culture. So places like Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Indonesia, I just love that part of the world. It is talking about earlier, the taking a break. I do have to build in some down days because it does wear me out immensely, but it's such a beautiful part of the world.
That's really cool to know. That also brings us to the end of our episode. So thank you again so much for coming on and giving us some insight about what it's like to travel as a wheelchair user, and especially as such a well-traveled wheelchair user, holding your record. So yeah, if you have any last words you want to address to our listeners, or if you want to tell them where they can find you on socials, or if there's any projects that you want to promote, then please go ahead.
Sure. My website is reneebruns.net. You can find all of my links to social media there. I am also, I have launched a life coaching business specifically for people that are looking to get out and start traveling, but are uneasy or kind of need that push to get over the hump of how to do it. And if you're disabled or have a disability and need some guidance on that, I have the ability to do that too. So reneebruns.net. My Instagram is Wheels Travels. Wheels, obviously, for the wheelchair travels. And then my Facebook is Renee Bruns too. So.
And we'll put all of those in the episode description. So if anybody wants to go check more of what Renee's doing out, give her a follow, you can do that in the episode description.
Thank you both so much. This has been an absolute pleasure and so much fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on.
That's all for this episode. If you'd like more Away She Goes in your life, make sure to stop by girlswhotravel.org/podcast. That's where you can fill out a form if you're interested in being a guest on the show. You can also write to us at awayshegosgwt@gmail.com or leave us a message on our Google voicemail from any phone or computer at 1-563-503-6323. To follow our adventures, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Carli Sees the World. Carli is spelled Carli.
You can also follow me at Sophia AEZ, Sophia with a PH. Away She Goes is part of Girls Who Travel, a community dedicated to radically redefining travel to be inclusive, sustainable, and empowering. You can learn more about GWT, find travel tips and support, shop travel-themed items made by GWT members, and join our Facebook group with nearly 100,000 women all around the world at girlswhotravel.org. We can't wait to connect and explore with you.
Away she goes.